Modern Dadhood. Modern Dadhood podcast.
Back again. It's Modern Dadhood, and we're back again.
We good?
We're good. Are you good?
Always.
I'm good.
Marc, thanks for showing up.
I had no choice but to show up. You told me to show up.
I would argue that you had a choice. I mean, I've been blown off before for things.
By me?
It wouldn't. No, not by you, but I'm just saying, like, if you blew me off, it's not like the whole thing's over.
No, I would never blow you off, man.
Why don't you introduce the podcast?
I will. Friends, you're listening to Modern Dadhood, which is an ongoing conversation about the joys, challenges, and general insanity of being a dad in this moment. As we've already covered, my name is Marc, M-A-R-C, and I'm a dad to twin boy 4.7-year-olds, and I have two of them, which is the same as having a 10-year-old.
Of course, that's how it works.
Don't think about it too hard. What about you?
My name is Adam Flaherty, and I'm a dad to two daughters who are 8.5 and 5.5. Dads, wherever you're listening, we would ask that you please take a moment to subscribe and to leave Modern Dadhood a rating and a review. It can be very quick, and it goes a long way for us. That may be on Apple, on Amazon Music, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Pocket Casts, anywhere you might be listening. Thank you so much for your support.
You know, you didn't address that to the grandparents in the audience. All the meemaws and peepaws out there.
Pretty sure if I say dads, any grandfather listening is also a dad.
Yeah, but they went like this. They went, what? Huh?
Who are we chatting with today, Marcus?
I'm excited because we're talking to Joe Keohane today. Journalist, writer, editor. He's got work in all sorts of publications. He's got a great article that you and I both read in Men's Health about postpartum depression in men. What do you think about that?
I think it's great. I think we had an awesome chat with him, and I think that we should play it back in about 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Start the clock. By the way, how was your Halloween? Good?
Oh yeah, Halloween was great. You know, we've talked about it before, but we get hundreds of kids in the neighborhood, so it is a zoo. It's wonderful, but it was awesome. Girls had a blast. They ate tons of candy. I ate no candy.
Don't lie to me. Don't lie to me about eating no candy. We don't have to talk about it. I know. But look, don't forget what's right here. Points to shoulder.
A soft piece of fabric that will collect my tears.
Yeah. Yes.
Costumes. I had a Mirabelle from Encanto.
Mirabelle.
And I had a Wednesday Addams.
Did you and Sarah dress up at all?
Sarah dressed up. She did like Morticia. Usually I pull together a costume last minute, but I just wasn't feeling it this year. And I hung back and handed out candy, and it was a very enjoyable, non-stressful evening.
That's fun. Handing out candy is also fun. We're still at the point where we got to go out with the kids. We just leave the bucket with a little sign that no one reads that says, please take one.
Yeah.
But we went, we tried to do a family thing this year. We did all superheroes. One son wanted to be Batman. The other one wanted to be Spider-Man. So we had two comic book universes to deal with. Jamie, my wonderful wife, if you've never seen a photo of her, she's blonde and she's perfect for Harley Quinn, for the Harley Quinn character.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So she went all in on the Harley Quinn character to the point where all throughout our house are sequins from her red and blue shorts, like hot pants shorts that she had on with her costume. But she nailed it. She did fantastic. It was a lot of fun. So she did the DC universe. I had to go Marvel. So
let me guess. You could pull off Peter Parker really well. You have that look. You look like Tobey Maguire.
I totally could. I'm nerdy. I'm
Gaunt.
frail.
No, you
have a
just
frail
wouldn't have to
appearance.
dress up. You could just wear your own Marc Checkett style. And
But I couldn't be Spider-Man because my son was Spider-Man. So I just chose another character. I went with the
Bruce Wayne,
the Hulk.
Oh,
the
that's a good one.
Incredible Hulk, and I found a ridiculous inflatable costume. So and then I just went nuts with the green face paint, and it was a good time. A good time was had by all. Now we got to figure out how to get rid of all the candy without the kids realizing.
I think I can find a way. Unhinge the jaw and all of it down the hatch, wrappers and all. Just check myself into the morgue and just lay back and die happy.
Just anaconda that bucket of candy down the gullet. All right. Well, look, I'm here. I'm here for it if you want to talk about it. All right. Okay. Speaking of talking about things, worst segue ever. I'm excited to talk about this topic today. Postpartum depression in men. This is a thing that's been on my radar for, I think, probably our collective radar for a while in terms of topics. But while I never personally suffered from postpartum depression myself, my wife did. Jamie did. She had she suffered quite severely from postpartum depression for probably 4 to 6 months after the kids were born.
Wow.
So I had a firsthand sort of experience, like a front row seat in seeing like how severe something like that can get. And this is something that was before kids, was sort of on the peripheral. I knew what postpartum depression was, insofar as this is a thing that a large percentage of women go through. And even throughout the pregnancy, the days after the birth, being in the hospital, and then the months after, dealing with some severe depression along with my wife, I still never heard anything in regards to postpartum depression and how it affects men in any way. Obviously, there's a stigma attached to the subject at large, and postpartum depression in women is a very real issue. But it definitely, once we started this show and we started talking about dadhood and what modern dadhood is, this particular topic is a topic that sort of has come up time and time again for me because I experienced it alongside of my wife, but also because I noticed how little it was talked about throughout that whole time. I almost feel like you can't talk about this until you start to sort of pick apart all of the layers of stigma. It's like an onion in the sense that sort of you peel off one layer and you talk about the stigma, quote unquote, attached to it, but you realize then you find another sort of stigma that's attached to something else as well. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, on one hand, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from this preconceived notion of what you're supposed to be as a dad when you become a dad. And even more, let's just say, like, more primal than that is like, you're a guy, you protect, you take care of, and you protect, and you provide. And it seems simple when you think about it in those terms. And if you feel like you can't do that, well, then you're not just failing as like a parent, you're failing as a man also.
Right.
And then of course there's, and this is what I mean by like the layers, right? Like that's one thing. But then also if you make yourself emotionally vulnerable in starting to talk about this kind of stuff, that in and of itself has a little bit of a stigma attached to it, because you want to try to talk about it to get better. But at the same time, talking about your emotions deeply like that just compound those feelings of, well, I'm not a man. I'm already not a man. Now I'm even more of not a man because I'm sitting here like weeping and I want to talk with somebody about it. But then you add to that the layer that you look at your wife. You're not only failing your new child and you're failing yourself as a man, you're failing her also because she's relying on you to do this thing. And if you add to that scenario postpartum depression, if your wife has postpartum depression, then it's like, then you want to revert even further back, even further away into this totally unattainable, I'm going to power through it without any help kind of, it's just these things, these just layers that like compound and fold in on themselves and make it more and more difficult to even begin to deal with it.
Right. So it in that layer that you're describing, if you don't address it, you eventually become a less effective, less helpful, less dependable partner.
Yeah.
And parent.
Yeah.
But if you do address it, then there's a stigma already that attention shouldn't be on you for this when she's the one who carried and delivered this child.
Feels like
you were just there.
Right. It feels like a classic lose-lose situation.
The article that we are referring to in Men's Health, written by Joe Keohane, is called "The Unrelenting Agony of Being a Depressed New Dad. Paternal Postpartum Depression Isn't a Joke. It's an Epidemic." We'll link to it in the show notes. And listeners, we highly recommend you check it out because it's a great article. I learned a lot from it, and I think it would be a great time to play back our recent chat with Joe. So I'm excited to welcome Joe Keohane to the conversation. Joe is a journalist and an editor whose work has appeared in publications like The New Yorker, The Boston Globe, Entrepreneur Magazine, Esquire Magazine, and many more. Joe lives with his wife and his 6-year-old daughter in New York City. And Joe, we're excited to have you here today to talk about postpartum depression in men. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
So, Joe, obviously you've covered lots of different topics pertaining to men, pertaining to dads, but I'm curious how this topic of paternal postpartum depression became of interest to you. Is this something that was assigned to you by Men's Health? Is this something that's inspired by your own journey as a new dad? How did this article happen?
Yeah, more the latter. So I ended up pitching the story to Men's Health. My daughter is 6 years old now. When she was younger, it definitely scrambled me in a way that had never happened before. And I think that happens to everybody who has a kid. You never know what's coming until it's arrived. But I had some problems when she was little, probably for the first, couple of years or so, where, I was incredibly stressed out, incredibly tired. I felt like I was losing touch with myself. My temper was bad, just a lot of changes that I wasn't happy about. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was. In time, it's just I dealt with it. I did the thing that, I'm a Boston Irish Catholic guy where we are alien to therapy. And, there's the like fake Freud line that the Irish are the only people who are immune to psychoanalysis. So definitely not the type of people for whom therapy is like the first thing that comes to mind when you're having a hard time. But it passed, and I didn't think about it that much once I kind of got through it. But then, I was looking for story ideas, and I started to wonder, well, maybe this is something worth looking at. If this is a phenomenon, if this is something that's being studied, if this is something that we can cast some light on and maybe help some other guys who might be going through a similar thing and might have gotten blindsided by it and are disoriented and freaked out in the same way that I was. So I just started making some phone calls, and I called some therapists and some psychologists, and it turns out that this is something that, if not top of mind for people, was increasingly getting some attention. And there were some calls from some pretty credible people saying that this is a problem. This is something we need to look at, and maybe most of all needed to be destigmatized.
Yeah. You brought up the fact that it's stigmatized. I mean, we know a little about postpartum depression in women. I mean, it's something that's being studied more. It's something that's been, getting more attention, I would say maybe lately since say the 90s on. But paternal postpartum depression still really feels like there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, maybe you're, finding some things, in your research, and obviously the article was chock full of really insightful stories and, quotes from physicians and so on and so forth. It was really enlightening to me, but it still feels like it's unknown territory, and it still feels like there's a lot of stigma around it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the insights that you uncovered as you were researching and writing the article?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as you said, researchers have been taking postpartum depression in mothers seriously for really not that long. Yeah. It wasn't until 1994 that it was included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is like the Bible for mental health practitioners. And that's the book that contains like definitions of things so they can be diagnosed, So 1994 is not that long ago. And that was when they made it official. For male postpartum depression, that has not been included into the DSM yet. So there's no standard diagnostic definition of it. And that makes it very difficult to diagnose it, because if you don't have a definition, what are you going to say? How are you going to define it? So there are similarities between maternal postpartum depression and paternal postpartum depression. The big differences are in the way that they present and sort of the nature of them. So in the case of postpartum depression in mothers, there is a chemical element to it, right? You don't see that so much in male postpartum depression. You see a lot of the same kind of emotional withdrawal. You can see, wild fluctuations in weight, like high levels of anxiety, rages, recurring thoughts of suicide or death, substance abuse. And all those things can be symptoms of maternal postpartum depression too. The things that are more specific to men are kind of bound together with stoicism, with classic male stoicism. So emotional withdrawal, anger, cynicism, indecisiveness, compulsive working, compulsive exercising, stuff like that. That if you didn't know what you were looking at, that might not seem that unusual for you. That's why it really often falls to the men themselves to learn to recognize the danger signs and to seek help when they experience them. The one tricky thing with male postpartum depression is that it often presents as like stoicism. And this is partly due to the fact that, men are raised to be stoic when they have a hard time. And while that can be really useful in some instances, in mental health issues, it's actually a really harmful thing because you're hiding it from people who might be able to help you. So the stoicism, especially in a new father where you're expected to to provide support, care and support for both the child and for your partner. And that means you're expected to be the rock. You're expected to be stoic. You can't complain. Your partner's gone through something incredibly difficult, something physically draining. So when men in that context start to have a hard time, they just tend to revert to stoicism. I mean, I did. I went through this too. And when I wrote this story, people couldn't believe it. A friend of mine was just like, you are remarkably good at hiding negative emotions. I had no clue. So it's kind of a coping mechanism, but it's also kind of a harmful coping mechanism.
So what you're talking about something that is harmful. I'm directly harming myself. And then there's it sort of radiates out from there, right? I might not be able to help the way that I should be, for my family, or I might not be able to pay close attention at work or something like that. But then there's this systemic layer in that you've got a whole group of people who are keeping things in, which does nothing for the medical community when it comes to studying this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's sort of a loop. There's kind of a cycle that keeps it from getting the attention that it probably deserves. And some of it comes from men not reporting that they're having trouble, right? So there's not any data on this. And I should add this to another key distinction between postpartum depression in women and men is that for women, the onset is usually right after birth, the immediate aftermath of the birth. Whereas men, it can actually turn up a year later, 2 years later, and that makes it even more slippery and kind of hard to pin down. But the systemic part is very interesting. So you have a bunch of guys who are having a hard time, but they've been raised to be stoic, so they're not telling anybody about it. So they don't go to doctors, right? They don't go to mental health practitioners. Doctors and mental health practitioners get no experience with this, and so it's not real to them. If it's not real to them, then they're not going to research it. If they're not researching it, there's not going to be grant money made available to study it. And if there's not grant money made available to study it, it's not going to end up in the DSM and be a diagnosable, condition. So these are all the things that are keeping it from happening. It's just this self-reinforcing cycle.
Well, I wonder, like, when you were experiencing this yourself in the year or a couple of years after your daughter was born, was it on your radar at that time that it could be this?
No, I had no idea about this. That first couple of years or so were so intense. But no, I was just, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't get a handle on it. It was scary. It was disorienting. It was deeply confusing. You're not seeing people. It can be very isolating to be a new parent. The sleep deprivation is a killer. Like, that can really accelerate everything. But all this stuff started happening together in tandem, and I just didn't have any tools to deal with it. There are studies that show that if you go a month where you're chronically sleep deprived, children or no children, you'll start showing signs of clinical depression. So not getting enough sleep is a killer. And there's nothing you can do about it when you're a new parent. Like, it's just going out the window. But that's like one of the main drivers. The stress and anxiety of being a new parent. Stress is a real driver, and that could be stress of balancing work and parenting. It could be sort of identity stress where you feel like you're losing yourself because your whole place in the world has been altered by the arrival of a kid. But also, like, the stress of poverty, the stress of racism, that sort of thing, like, that can really drive this too. Isolation is a big one. There have been studies on this, how isolation can drive depression, and you really are, you're in a submarine. That's the best thing I can liken it to.
Yeah.
Those early days is like, I just remember them. I felt like I was underwater for so long.
Wow.
And it was early on. It's a very joyous occasion in many ways, but like, it was intense, man. And like, I wasn't leaving the house very much. And that's very difficult for me. But those feelings of inadequacy, those feelings of failure, you couple that with stress, with isolation, with sleep deprivation, all that stuff, and it can really get out of hand pretty quickly.
We talk a lot about on this show what we have in terms of roadmaps when we become fathers for the first time. So there's this whole aspect of you're trying to sort of course correct the things that you wish were different when you were growing up, right? But then you add to that, just like on a large societal scale, we approach things so differently now than what perhaps maybe our parents or our parents' parents did. And especially when it comes to things like mental health. For example, I mean, this was not a topic at all that I talked about growing up with my parents, even though there was definitely signs of depression here and there and everywhere, in my family. It was not a topic at all.
Yeah. I mean, to that point about role models, I don't think it's, I think this has probably been consistent through the life of the species, where everyone looks at the way they were raised and they try to remedy some of the things that they thought were subpar. And in doing so, they create blind spots and they find new ways to screw up their kids. And then their kids get to try to remedy that and make new mistakes.
There's another cycle.
So, yeah, it's kind of, it's sort of a farce. But yeah, it's just very interesting to me that like we are like, as a generation, we are trying to remedy certain imperfect things about the way we were raised, but we're also adding so much work to it that I think we're probably creating new problems unintentionally, just by failing to cope with the sheer workload. Not even to talk about the mental health component of it.
If dads who are listening, let's say they're 6 months into having their first kid and they're experiencing some of these symptoms, some of these behaviors that we've been describing, like if they go to their doctor and bring this up, would their doctor identify that and kind of label that, or not necessarily, because it's not something that has a hard and fast definition?
Yeah, it can't really be diagnosed if it doesn't have a diagnostic, if there aren't diagnostic criteria, like agreed upon diagnostic criteria. I mean, the bigger problem is that we're even talking about mental health professionals and doctors and nurses aren't aware that this is real. So what you can do is sort of unpack it. You don't need a diagnosis of postpartum depression necessarily. It can be an anxiety disorder. It's sort of like an umbrella catch-all term for depression/anxiety disorder. It could be both. It could be one or the other. But anything that's sort of debilitating, it's sort of preventing you from coping. It's preventing you from doing your work, doing the work you need to do. The sort of mental health community is probably catching up to it a little bit more now. They might have a better handle on it. You talk to fathers, you'll be surprised. If you talk to a few guys, most likely one of them, maybe without knowing what it is, might have gone through the same thing. And so that normalizes it a little bit, makes it easier to talk about it, makes it seem like something you can get your arms around because it's something that's been experienced by many people and not just you alone. If therapy is your thing, then seek out therapy. Even if you don't think it's your thing, give it a shot. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If you want to talk to a doctor, talk to a doctor. But I think that if you're uncomfortable with talking to a professional about it, just talk to a couple other fathers and see what turns up.
Yeah. I was talking with my wife just before we hopped on here tonight, because incidentally, she actually suffered. She had a lot of difficulty with postpartum depression right after our kids were born. So just for your context, Joe, we have twins, and they're 4.5. So after they were born, my wife, it was like the flip of a switch is really kind of what it felt like. It was one day we didn't have kids, and then the next day we did, and everything was just so different. But one thing that we were talking about was the idea that she had this preconceived image in her mind of what motherhood was going to be like for her. She pictured, having a really, quiet moment in the middle of the night, breastfeeding and with one kid and having this bonding experience, and didn't pan out that way. And I wonder how much of that men also do. Because I don't know that I personally, I don't know that I had these preconceived ideas of what especially the early years of parenthood was going to be like. But I wonder if other men do that, and if that plays a role sometimes. It's a really interesting point. There is one thing that I heard a lot from the guys I talked to, and I probably talked to 20 fathers for this. I ended up putting, I think, 6 in the story or 5 in the story. I just didn't have room for everyone's stories, but there are so many good stories out there. One thing that a lot of them mentioned and a lot of therapists affirmed as well when I asked them was, you're told in a way that the first time you meet your child, you're going to feel this incredibly profound bond. Yes.
Right. And everyone is kind of told that, and it turns up in the culture and in the way people talk to people who are about to have kids, like, oh, just wait until you look into her eyes for the first time. You'll never, you'll be bonded for life immediately. But the fact is that that's not always the case. So a lot of guys, they'll be in the delivery room or wherever they meet the baby for the first time. And it's not that they won't feel nothing, but they won't feel the magical, transcendent sensation that they've been told that they were going to feel. And then they start to feel like, is there something wrong with me? Mm-hmm. Is this ever going to happen? Like, do I not love my kid? Am I unfit? And again, you pair that sort of stuff, that kind of self-questioning with sleep deprivation, stress, and everything else, and it can get really out of control. Those thoughts can get really out of control and start self-reinforcing. And then they can spiral out into feelings of more general inadequacy and ineptitude. And then all of a sudden you don't feel confident feeding the kid. You don't feel confident changing a diaper. You feel like you're a bumbling idiot. Mm-hmm. And if, and everyone's kind of a bumble. I mean, all fathers are bumbling idiots, I think, to a certain degree at the beginning, especially with the first kid, because you just don't, this is it's the apocalypse, it's like a wonderful apocalypse where it just shakes up everything in your life. And you can't really be prepared for it. But, when guys start to get kind of hesitant and they start to feel really insecure, maybe they withdraw because they're not used to feeling like failures. And then their partner might start not letting them do things because they're bumbling, just being like, give me the baby, you're not doing that right. And that sort of gatekeeping can also accelerate postpartum depression as well. So you can see how something little like that, having a slightly unreasonable expectation about the fathering process can, under certain circumstances, really spiral into a serious mental health crisis.
I don't want to diminish the seriousness of the topic here at all, but to a degree, it almost is. It just has a PR problem in a sense that Like, I just can't help but wonder if we didn't refer to it, for example, as paternal postpartum depression, but instead just referred to it as like parental depression, would we have an easier time? When I say like the collective we, would we have an easier time talking about and finding solutions for men who are suffering from depression?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it is different from postpartum depression in women. Again, just because there's a chemical underpinning to postpartum depression in women that you don't really see in men necessarily. But yeah, parental depression for sure. I mean, I would hope that we get closer to an understanding of the stresses and the difficulties of modern parenthood for everybody, to take a more holistic look at the mental health of parents in general and how they interact with, with work, with society and that sort of thing, I think is well overdue, and it's going to be absolutely necessary. There is sort of a framing problem here where dealing with emotional difficulty, I think historically with men, has been equated to like wallowing, whining, moaning, weakness, that sort of thing. But it is a form of strength to take care of a problem that's preventing you from being the father that you should be, that you want to be, the partner that you should be and you want to be. It's problem solving. It's practical.
Right.
It's eminently practical. Like any other part of your life, if something was misfiring, if something was getting in the way, if your radiator was clanging all night, you fix the radiator. This is what you have to do. You got to call someone, you have to take care of it. So, the more men talk about this, the better, because it destigmatizes it. The numbers suggest that maybe 1 in 10 new fathers suffer from this. So it's a significant population of people. But, those 1 in 10, they're not talking to each other, and most of them don't even know what's happening to them. They don't know that this is real, and their doctors may not know it's real, and society doesn't really want to listen to it. And that's not an optimal situation for the guys, for their partners, or for the kids. So spreading the word about it, talking about it frankly, and then just going out and trying to fix a problem, I think is the way to go about it. It's the way to frame it too when you're dealing with guys.
Yeah, I love that idea of shifting the perspective and framing it as a problem that needs to be solved in a sort of way to kind of almost trick yourself into tackling it as opposed to avoiding it.
Yeah, my wife always laughs at like the dumb men's products that are like clearly just moisturizer, like any other moisturizer, but they call it like fighting tools or something.
Yeah.
Like tools for your skin.
Yeah, you're not moisturizing your skin. You're defeating dry skin.
Right. You're crushing dry skin.
Yeah.
But all that stuff, like, maybe we have a little hump we have to get over. If the language needs to change, then that's fine.
Those products sell for a reason. I mean, I'm not necessarily advocating for, capitalizing on that particular aspect of men, but there's something to the psychology of it, I guess.
Yeah, you got to make people comfortable. I mean, we've been raised the way we've been raised, right? Yeah. We're not captive to it, but it does need to be engaged with if you're ever gonna hope for any sort of meaningful progress.
Well, thanks for shedding some light on it and sharing your learnings and your experiences with us. We appreciate it. Joe, before we let you go, I do want to plug that you released a book in April 2021 called The Power of Strangers, The Benefits of Connecting in a Suspicious World, which sounds awesome, and I can't wait to read it. It sounds like you also have a new co-written novel coming out soon-ish.
Like 2 weeks, I guess, 2-3 weeks. Is a novel called The Lemon, and it's just sort of a scathing satire of the high-end food world and Hollywood and the media, and we're adapting it for TV now. So the bulk of my time these days is writing the pilot for this TV show.
Dads and moms listening, you can learn more about Joe and his books and these projects on his website, joekeohane.net. That's Joe, KEOHANE.net. Thanks again, Joe. It really has been a pleasure talking to you, and we wish the best to you and your family.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's great talking to you.
Thanks, Joe.
I got an instant regret.
You do?
Instant regret.
I just said something stupid to one of my kids.
Instant regret.
I wish I could take it back, but I can't.
Instant regret.
Stupid.
Instant regret.
All right. I'm going to make this one quick.
Okay.
I grew up in an old house,
Okay.
and occasionally there would be like, you know, a rodent that got trapped like in the basement or in a wall. And from a young age, I sort of knew what that smell was when there's like a dead rodent, like a mouse.
Yeah, I know that smell.
My mom had a great nose for it, and so I sort of developed that too.
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks ago, I was in one of my daughter's rooms, and I caught a whiff of that smell, and I'm like, I know what this is.
No.
It's got to be a mouse somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I traced the smell to a corner of the room. I couldn't find it anywhere. My daughter was like helping me she wasn't freaked out. She was like trying to help me figure it out. And then, you know, we sort of landed on, well, must be in the wall, like whatever. It'll within probably 2 days, that smell goes away.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't think anything more of it until last night.
Halloween night?
On Halloween night,
This story's
I went
getting spooky.
into my daughter's room.
Mm-hmm.
I turned on a floor lamp. That's one of those lamps that's like tall. And at the top, there's a dome, an open dome in the light bulb. You could reach in and there's a light bulb inside. I turn on that light and I see a shadow inside that dome.
Okay.
Didn't think too much of it, but it caught my eye. So I tipped the light down towards me so that I could, you know, get to my height so I could see. And inside,
Oh, God.
it was a baby bat.
No, what? Ugh.
And I'm like, well, at least I know, like I wasn't crazy. At least I've identified what that smell was. But then I'm like, I got to get it out of here, of course.
Oh, man, I'm getting the itchies from listening to this. Okay.
So my kid was like around, but I'm like, she can't see this.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I go and get, you know, whatever, a big cloth, and I kind of like scoop it out, and you know, she's totally unaware. I bring it downstairs. Sarah's downstairs. And here's my instant regret. I didn't pull any pranks, but I got downstairs and I'm holding this in my hand, and I'm like, I look at her and I'm like, remember a few weeks ago when I smelled that smell and couldn't find a mouse?
Mm-hmm.
She's like, you have one in your hand? I was like, not exactly. And so I show her, she gasps, and immediately her mind goes to like, we can't have a bat infestation. Like this is, I'm like, this is not a huge deal. Like we've never had an issue with bats before. Like houses occasionally have stuff like this happen. It's not an emergency. And of course, like her mind's going to, that can't happen again. I'm not willing to risk our kid getting like bitten while she's sleeping,
Sure,
which
yeah.
like, I'm like, that's totally legitimate. Like I completely understand that. But again, my brain is like, this is a one-off thing. It's a tiny bat. It's dead.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's a nest of them living in our home.
Yeah.
I had the wherewithal to not show my kid. Big dumb me couldn't like hide my excitement for finding a really cool dead animal to explore. I had to tell my wife about it and show her.
Hey, Sarah, check it out.
Yeah.
Check this out.
Check it out.
Look at
You're
this.
not going to believe this.
Isn't this thing cool?
What a moron. End of the episode, man.
We did it?
I don't want to do any of this script. Will you do it?
I'll do it. You ready?
Yeah.
I'm going to do it at record speed. So
Blast through,
So-
except for the Pete Morse part. Say that at normal
I
speed so
will.
he gets the recognition he deserves.
I will. Let me
See if you can do it in one breath.
Dads, you can find us at moderndadhood.com or Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever you listen, wherever you prefer to listen, please do us a favor, subscribe, leave us a quick rating and review, even tell a friend. If you do go to moderndadhood.com, you can check out, I can't do it. There's too much pressure. If you're over at moderndadhood.com, check out the t-shirts, check out the dad hoodies, some great stuff there. If you like the internet, but you don't want to go to the .coms, you spend your time on the Instagrams and the Facebook, you can search for us there. We're there also. If you like email, if email's your thing, you can drop us a line at hey@moderndadhood.com. We have a few thanks that we always like to, we'd like to profess here at the end of the episode. We'd like to say thanks to Casper Baby Pants and Spencer Albee for all the wonderful music you hear in Modern Dadhood. We'd like to say a special thanks to Pete Morse at Red Vault Audio for turning the turnies and dialing the dials and fading the fadies. and mixing our show, making it sound wonderful. And of course, thank you so much to our wonderful guest, Joe Keohane. And finally, the tables have turned. Adam Flaherty will round out the episode with a special thanks.
And thank you for listening.
Podcast. This is modern.